Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 428 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Eric Botbyl, who is both a working artist as well as a gallery owner. In our interview, we talk about developing his highly gestural pottery forms, as well as the creation of the companion gallery, which he manages with his wife, Jill. To find out more, you can visit companiongallery.com. I'd like to thank the folks that have donated to our 10th anniversary fund drive. We are listener supported, so I'd like to thank Jeremy Kalin, Heather Gray, and Callie Dunbar Weir. We are ending the fund drive with a bang, so every new or renewing patron on Patreon gets a free t-shirt in addition to their normal perks. You can sign up today at patreon.com/redclayrambler. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. When it comes to the gallery and recruiting new artists, what's the process? Like, how do you get people involved?
I guess first of all is we are trying to be the smallest gallery ever.
Are you succeeding?
I hope so. Yeah, it's like we want to be, very inclusive and stay small at the same time. Just because it's a small crew, it's not a huge space. Our previous space where we started was tiny. I mean, the gallery was like 400 square feet or something. It was little. But I'm a potter too. When I see work that makes me want to get up from my wheel and go work for them for a little while, it's hard to describe. But like when. Yeah, I should reach out. Like these pots are amazing.
I love that action idea. Like you like them so much, you're like, oh shit, let me go check them out or talk to them or pick that pot up. I mean, that's why NCECA is when an NCECA is pottery friendly, because sometimes they kind of lean more sculptural, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I love the years in which it's like pottery heavy, because I'm just going around just like geeking out, looking at people's work.
A lot of folks where was it? California? I didn't go this year. But a lot of folks came back and they were like, man, you couldn't find 3 pots anywhere this year.
Really?
Like it was just, I don't know, the kind of folks reporting back afterwards were like, yeah, just very sculptural installation kind of stuff.
That kind of makes sense. The West Coast has that. I mean, there's tons of potters on the West Coast, but I think sometimes in terms of gallery representation, it can kind of lean towards more sculpture. But can you talk about that balance? You said like we want to be inclusive, but we also don't want to be huge. So how do you be inclusive, but also have an opinion or have an aesthetic that Companion represents?
I think I need to maybe back up a little bit to like how we started. When I was in school and the years after school, I was kind of I had it in my head that I was like, yeah, when I grow up, I want to be in like 50 galleries and when I was, younger, early mid-20s, I was fortunate enough to land a couple shops and galleries. And it is not what I thought it was going to be. It was like after a while, like I had never met anyone. I'd never spoken to anybody. It was all just through email. Just kind of cold and distant, where I was like, hey, I thought we were like doing a thing here. And I don't know, it's just not what I thought it was going to be. So when we started working with folks, it was important for me not as like a business model, like just important to me, that was like, I want to know these folks, on a personal level. And when I say that we're trying to stay small is, all of a sudden one day we represented 50 people. And in my head, I was like, man, I have not talked to so-and-so in like 2 months. And that just feels like a sin. And I haven't talked to so-and-so in this long, and it just kind of hit me like I'm losing track of like the thing that I love about this. And it was like, we should like scale back a little. Above anything else, man, it's just people. It's about people. It's just people who happen to make pots, really good pots. So yeah, don't ask me for like business advice. There's no book on how to do this, and I'm sure every gallery does it differently. And we're just a very like vessel centric, young, funky, functional.
How did you guys come to Tennessee? Like originally what drew you down? Because before we started recording, we talked about how you're actually from New Jersey, where kind of close to where I live now.
Jersey represent. My dad had, all right, let's take it back to 96.
A good year.
Yeah. At that point, I wanted to study psychology. And so I came to this school in West Tennessee for the sole purpose of studying psychology. I drove 1,000 miles, went to the admissions thing. I was like, I want to be a shrink, sign me up. And they said, all the classes are full, take an elective. And I saw like pottery 101 or whatever on there. I was like, well, that sounds easy while we pass the time. There was nothing easy about it. It's the hardest class I took that year, but nothing else captured my attention in that way.
And what school was it?
The school was called Union University. Yeah, just a small school in Jackson, Tennessee. And so, wait, what's the question again?
Out of all the Christian schools in the U.S., how did you pick that one?
So my dad and I drove on like this tour, around like checking out schools. And one is like, you have to, dress in a suit and tie all day. I'm not trying to go there. The other one, there's like pink and blue sidewalks and you can't talk to girls. I'm not trying to go to that one. So this one, Union, they had a swimming pool and there were ashtrays in the dorm rooms my freshman year. And
you were sold.
I was like, hey, I can smoke. I can go swimming. This is, yeah, like, why not? Let's go, Yeah, it turned out to be a good decision. Do you know Paige Ward?
I do. I was trying to think of who I knew that went there, and Paige is who it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paige is there now with Lee Benson. And I don't know if you know Lee's son, Aaron Benson.
Okay, yeah, right.
Which I think he's teaching at Northern Alabama.
So did going to a religious school help your religious faith, or did it hurt it? Because I have about a 50-50 chance when I talk to people that go to religious schools, oftentimes that actually ends their faith. So what was what happened with you?
I was there strictly for the art department. Like I fell so in love with clay and kilns and all that every other class was like this obstacle in the way of the studio. It was like, okay, you have to get up and go to biology because they're going to kick you out if you don't pass this thing. And if they kick you out, then you lose your studio. That was kind of my, and while I was there, man, I really had no sense of the school's like political leanings, or it just was not on my radar. I wasn't in the like religious studies department. My faith was fine then. And I think I've always been like to religious people, I've been like reckless and, kind of the crazy one. And then to non-religious people, they're like, oh, he's, careful what I'm like, I'm not like that. But I think as far as affecting my faith, that's been more in recent years that I'm asking myself questions, like looking at the broader American kind of evangelical Christian church and not seeing a whole lot of love and tolerance and forgiveness. And just the kind of that creepy notion of like white nationalism creeping into the church. And I've taken a few steps back. I've taken more than a few steps back, where it's, I feel like my own heart is more or less where it's been, but just the corporate version of it. I'm like, I don't know what y'all are reading. I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what. It just couldn't be further from where I'm at and what my interpretations are.
I know. I think sometimes, people leave the church and sometimes the church leaves you, and I think that is kind of hard to admit at times. But I'm always interested to talk to people in those fork in the road moments, where you can kind of go one way or the other and how we go. Because I think that tells us a lot about our values. So, tying back into the gallery, like one of the values of the gallery is that you want a personal touch with the artists that you're representing. You don't want it to be just capitalism. It's more than that. It's about you representing them as people. And to do that, you have to really get to know them. So can you talk more about what the values of the gallery are beyond that personal touch?
Man, I had somebody reach out to me like a year or two ago, and they were writing something on craft and ethics, something like that. And they were looking for a quote, and I was like, don't touch the interns and pay artists on time. How about that? Can we like just start there, everyone?
I'm laughing. I shouldn't be laughing, but how basic that is refreshing, because some of the ethics of leadership in general, people's bodily autonomy is important, and pay people on time is just like, it's morally ethical if you're taking in money to pass on the money to the person. So I like that quote. You might have to make that into a bumper sticker or a t-shirt.
Well, Gerald Brown from Play Siblings, she's over in Philly. I think she made a shirt this last year that said something like "pay artists" or "pay artists on time." Yeah, and I was like, "Amen, sister." Yeah. And I think some of it may just come from before we had this space, and I was dealing with other spaces, just all the stuff that made me kind of feel icky or excluded or distant or whatever. I was like, if we're going to do something, let's just not do that.
So how did you switch spaces? Did you guys have something caused you to move? And I can't remember what the circumstances were.
Yes. So my first studio was in Jackson, Tennessee. Just a little bit of background there. After I graduated, Jill's my wife, we had gotten married and we were expecting our first daughter. And I was working at the university as a shop tech, and I think I was making $600 a month or something, but I had a studio. And to me, that was like currency, I was like, I can make this work. But the closer she came to her due date, the more I was like, I might need to like get a real job. So I went over to this place in town called Morris Nursery. It was a landscaping company, and I hired on their landscaping. And for about a month, I dug holes and spread mulch and planted azaleas and all that. And I mean, when I work, I work, I gave it 110%. So I did that for about a month. And I enjoyed landscaping. but there was just this thing inside me that was like, okay, you got this degree. Now we're over here planting azaleas. And on my lunch break one day back at the nursery, I went up and I talked to the owners just like on a whim. I was like, hey, what would you guys think about starting a pottery here? And the owner, Debbie Morris, she said, well, it's about time. She said, when you put in your resume with like pottery this and ceramics that, she said, I had always kind of wanted to do something like that here. And so she was like, honestly, we've just been like giving you stuff to do until you like maybe came around. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, we started there. They had this little building out back where they were storing like fertilizer and mulch. And we renovated a little 10 by 10 space. And I worked in there for a year or two. And then that was about 25% of that building. And then we took over half of it and eventually took over the whole thing. But that's where I started.
Humble beginnings. That's great.
Man, that little room is like, if I yawned like this, like I would burn my elbow on the kiln. It was like it was right next to me. And we didn't even have a door on it until I came in like mid-November, and there was a thin sheet of ice on my slurry bucket. And I was like, y'all, I think we need a door on this place. Yeah, that's how it started. Did I even answer your question? What was the question?
You did a little bit. How you changed studios. So what then changed from that studio to having the gallery here?
So I was at that space for 6 years. And then there's a lady named Rita Howard. She was Miss Tennessee in like 1960 something. She was a customer, and she was coming out to buy some pots. And then she was just kind of looking around the building, and she said, Peter and I have just planted a vineyard in Humboldt, and we have this building up on the hill that we don't really know what to do with. And she said, she was like, you should come look at it. So I did, and it was an old hog barn, solid block, and it was about twice as big as what I was in then, which was tiny. So Jill and I talked about it and thought about it, and I was like, yeah, let's move to a vineyard. So we spent about a year renovating that, and I was kind of back and forth between both studios. That was in 2008. So we moved to the Crown Winery in Humboldt, Tennessee, it's the largest vineyard in Tennessee. And that's actually our neighbor now. So I was there for 10 years. My dear friend, Peter Howard, passed away. He was an English gentleman, just as rascally as could be. He was in his late 70s, just a character. I mean, he was so funny in every way, but he was brilliant. He was a gas physicist. He had like a dozen patents on the space shuttle, and just a rascally, brilliant, like British caricature of a man. He was great. But Peter passed away. He had pancreatic cancer. And with that, Rita decided to move back to Chicago, and they sold the property. So I was there with the new owners for not quite a year. And they approached me and said, we think we have use for this building. We need to talk about you relocating. And the timeline, I forget what they proposed, but it was ridiculous. It was like, can you move in like 2 months or something? And I was like, God, I don't think so, but we'll try. So we had actually purchased this building already. Peter and Rita owned this, and it was a former mechanic shop. So this building's about 3,000 square feet, and it borders the vineyard. So we had a place. It was just beyond gross. So when we began, we basically stripped it down to nothing. Where it was just a concrete pad and a metal skeleton, and completely started over.
So in this timeline of establishing yourself, when did Companion become a big part of your work beyond you just being a potter as well?
So when we moved to the vineyard in 2008, at that point, I had a bunch of wholesale accounts and I was doing craft shows and stuff like that. And when we moved up there, I made the decision while we were renovating to kind of like section off this little spot in the front, which I mentioned before. It was like 400 square feet. Because my kids, my daughters were starting to get older, and I was traveling around like a gypsy, packing pots, unpacking pots, packing pots, and I was like, oh, I'm so tired of this, But being there where they kind of had this draw already with the winery, it's like, maybe I'll just do a little showroom here and stop traveling all over the place like a crazy person. And so when we first opened, that's what I did. And it was really difficult to keep that space full. I mean, we did it up nice with drywall and track lighting and pedestals, but it was just me. And so the response was good. And then people would come to see us and there's like 7 pots in the room.
Yeah, not a good look.
This is so dumb. And I had met a bunch of folks through the Tennessee Craft Festival in Nashville every year. So I knew, some potters in the area. And I reached out to a few and I was like, hey, you want to send some pots over? So at first it was like one at a time. Somebody would send 30 pots. And then there was like me and Amelia Stamps, me and Shadow May. And then all of a sudden there was like 2 people in there with me. And then there was 3, it happened really slow. Man, I never tried to start a gallery. I promise. Like, we did not even try to do it. But Jill was up there one day and just helping me like straighten, clean up. And she's so good at like staging things. I can make pots and put them on a shelf, and put a price on it. And then she comes and like rearranges them. And you could almost add a 0 to each one. I don't know how she does it, but she's great at it. But yeah, at that point, there was like 6 or 7 people in there. And we had a discussion that day that was like, this is feeling like something other than like Eric and Friends. It's starting to feel like maybe its own thing. And around that time also in our marriage was like, she was raising kids and I was just working all the time. And we had gotten to this season where we're kind of living this parallel life, which is not what either of us wanted. And so we were, anytime we're working stuff out, we just like walk the driveway. We've put about 1 trillion miles on our driveway. But it was a great conversation. She was like, I don't want you to miss this. And I don't want you to like look back and regret anything. And also I was getting so overwhelmed because back then I was teaching 7 classes a week, plus making my own pot, plus tending the gallery and all that. And I was like, well, I need help. So that was actually a wonderful point in our marriage and in our lives where like we blended those parallel lives, where she started helping out so much with the shop, and that freed me up to be able to spend more time with my family. My schedule was crazy back then. So her maiden name is Companion. Her family is Italian, and in Italy they were Campagna, that was their name, but it's also like a region of Southwest Italy. And I think it means countryside. And we were at the vineyard. It was this very like rolling hill kind of pastoral setting. So this was all happening with our life and kind of, like I said, like blending those parallel lives again. And I was like, well, if we're going to call this thing anything, I want to kind of honor her and her family with it, you know. So that's where companion came from.
I like the name because it also has the connotation of like, we're going to do it with you. We're your companion, which I think that I had no idea that it was tied to your wife's name. I thought it was just a good choice. Like it has connotations of home and security and all of those things.
That's just a bonus. Yeah. It meant around here, I don't know what's wrong with the locals around here, but I've had so many people come in and they're like, Champion Gallery. They're like, you think a lot of yours. I'm like, man, read the sign. Like, that's not what it says.
Champion Gallery might have hit a whole new audience, though. Do you remember when Champion clothes in the 90s were like a thing? Do you remember that brand?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was part of the uniform, right? In
the
90s.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Amico Brent. For the past 100 years, Amico Brent has been creating ceramic supplies for our community, ranging from underglazes to electric kilns, and they have no plans of slowing down. With over 3,000 products, Amico Brent's top priority is making sure that all of their customer needs are met. From the professional to the student and everyone in between, their high-quality materials enable you to make your best work. To learn more, check them out at amico.com or on Instagram and Facebook at Amico Brent. You can also show them how you use Amico by sharing your work online with the hashtag HowIAmico. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfeld Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of thousands of objects made by over 800 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfeldcollection.com. Well, tell me about coming to a sense of your own aesthetic, because when I hear you talking about doing sales and, packing up pots, unpacking pots, like all of that, it seemed like that was maybe more about making a lot of pots. But I know the pots you make now that are heavily altered, thrown and altered, they are slow pots. These are not like, let's make 100 pots a day pots. So Talk to me about that balance.
Yeah, well, there was a time when I first started where I would crank like that when I was doing craft fairs and stuff. And I remember this lady came in my booth and she picks up this cup and she was like, oh, this is interesting. Tell me about this. I was like, well, I threw a cylinder and dipped it in blue and then hit the button. And like, as I was explaining the process, I was like, this is the dumbest story of like any pot ever made. It was, and just like reflecting back on my own life and life experience, which is complex. I was like, I'm not making pots that are, like anybody could make these. I was young, but something about that was like, yeah, I need to put more into these. Shortly after that, Kristen Kiefer came. I had graduated like years before, but Kristen Kiefer came and did a workshop at my alma mater. And I went over there and watched her work for a couple days. So like when I teach workshops now, people say, who do you think is your biggest influence? I'm like, well, it's a million things. And most of it is not even ceramic, but Kristen Kiefer. And people will like argue with me. They're like, no, she's not. Like your work is like the opposite of hers. I'm like, don't tell me. Like I know what my influence, and Man, that workshop, she gave me like the gift of permission. Every single thing she did, I was like, what? I didn't know you could do that. What? You can cut the rim? You can cut a hole, you can flip it upside down and like stick it to, just everything she did blew me away. And I went back to my own studio and I had to like slap my own hand in this effort to like not make her pots. Because I love her pots, but like that's not me. And I just took a lot of that stuff and like just let it percolate with everything else that I am. I don't know how else to explain that. But then, it started small, like, let's put some dimples in something, and make 100 of those. And then what if we came back in between those two dimples and like pushed out between each four? And then, well, instead of pushing between all four, if we only did two, that's going to make the pot kind of lean in one direction and give it like this little sense of motion. And then what if I came back between two of those dimples and like curled the foot up to act as this area that's going to frame where the handle would land? So it all happened very slowly. But yeah, it's just like learning to push clay around.
When you started saying this, I was thinking like, are you reading my mind? Because I literally had exactly the same experience with Kristen's workshop. It was in 2006 at the Odyssey Center. And I even describe it as she gave me permission to work with clay in a different way and also time. Like I had never seen someone who in this week-long workshop, she made, I think, like 6 pots. And she's like, it's okay. If you want to just make 4 pots and spend a week making those 4 pots, do it. And I had never heard anyone say that before. And I learned the same thing. She was the one that taught me that softness is a relationship of inward and outward pressure. And I see that in your work and in my work, in some of the older work that I was really altering things. It is that influence. So I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I have literally had exactly the same experience.
And she's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now fast forward, like we carry her work in the gallery. And I mean, it just, life is crazy. Just this full circle experience, but yeah, she's wonderful.
So as your pots have gotten more and more active, the surfaces have changed. And I know as someone who's altered pots in different bodies of work, it's hard to complement a very altered surface with color. Because if you do one color all over it, sometimes it camouflages it. But then ironically, if you put 4 or 5 colors, it also has the same effect. It camouflages it. So how have you learned to accentuate those surfaces over the years?
I mean, if I had to draw a chart of like my growth, it's just like anybody's. It starts low and just steadily rises. And when I got into color, it plummeted below the bottom baseline, like 100 feet. And I just knew, like, everybody get ready, because I'm about to make some bad pots while I figure this out. But I was 39 or 40 when I did that. And who it all goes back to is Kelsey Nagy. Kelsey.
I do, yeah.
I remember. So when she went down to Florida, she had met you there. And we would talk all the time. And after she met you, she just had nothing but nice words to say.
Aww.
And she was like, yeah, Ben is like, if your favorite grandma was also like a linebacker. He was like, he's just like the nicest,
That's hilarious. I'm going to have to send her a message. That's awesome.
Yeah. Her work is real colorful. And she was an intern with me for 4 years before she went that was like up at the vineyard. So before she went to Florida, she was with us. And she's back there with her underglazes and all that. And I was doing brown, black, shades of green. And we would critique all the time between us. And she'd say, why don't you put a little chartreuse on it? You know, and I was like, you shut the hell up. And she's like, well, you put a little red on it. I was like, look, knock it off. But yeah, there was, I think she was out of town for one weekend, and I was really getting into those crackled surfaces. And I went in there and dipped my brush into her red underglaze. And instead of doing like a black wash, I did a red wash and then fired that thing. It was like, huh. And then we collaborated on one of my basket forms where I approached it very different. Like she said, she wanted to work on a basket. So I approached it differently because it's like, I need to like leave room for Kelsey to speak. Collaborations are a whole other thing. What you asked me about color? Yeah.
Yeah, and just how you, because see, I saw some of the first work I saw of yours was the shades of brown, shades of black, and then a couple of years later, I saw you individually painting each crackled surface, and I was like, whoa! It was like walking into like Alice in Wonderland all of a sudden.
Yeah, those first ones were weird, and I'm kind of still doing that, but I hope they're working better. It's made me change clay bodies. And it's brought me to a point where I'm firing everything 4 or 5 times to be able to do it like I really want to do it. I also feel like I always have kind of 2 or 3 different series of work happening simultaneously, which makes me feel a little bit schizophrenic. But if I took any one of them out, I would not be fulfilled in the studio, and it allows me to exercise different aspects of what I'm doing. But yes, it is definitely a challenge to not like overload it. So where I've landed now is like when I'm doing those really activated, like crackled surfaces, I'm putting those on quieter forms. Because I feel like what I was doing with those really altered surfaces is like, this is kind of a lot. And like, I don't know that they're helping each other. You know, there was like this, like not a good competition happening on the surface, you know? So I'm trying to keep that crackled work, the forms a little quieter, which is difficult for me. Like it's really hard for me to just like throw something and then that's it. You know? And I feel like a little lazy about it or something until I get into the surfaces and I'm like, okay, it's been 3 days. Like maybe we could wrap this up. But on the more altered pots where there's a lot of surface stuff going on. My approach to those recently have been, so I switched my clay body to are you familiar with the standard 710?
I don't know their clays that well.
It's a dark brown, fires almost black. They have another version of it, 266, which is just buttery, but this one, it's the exact same thing, but it's got some fine grog in it. And so for all the like pushing and pulling I'm doing, I need that like tensile strength in there. So that clay will fire almost black, just this beautiful, like dark chocolate brown. So as I approach it with color, the first thing I'm doing is covering the whole pot, like base layers. And whatever colors I'm layering on this, I know that I'm going to come back at the end and like abrade through all those layers. So with whatever palette that I'm choosing, that dark brown is always one of those colors, right? So it would be like pink with like a deep orange, maybe a faded yellow, and then dark brown, but I don't see that until the very end. So I'm building up layers. Some of it's more watercolor, some of it's dry brushing. I'll fire it to like set those and then come back and lay a thin wash like down into the low spots, get that fired. And then when I start to sand on them, I'm sanding, but it's more like painting a dark brown line.
Right, because you're sanding back to get that edge.
It's like bringing all that information from when it was wet clay back up through the surface.
When you're going through this process of refiring, like some clay bodies on refiring will crack, and you're also altering the hell out of a lot of them. So is it just that is that's a clay body that can handle it? Or is there something you have to do? Like, do you have to baby them through the kiln in terms of the firing schedule to get them not to crack on refiring?
No, and I'm re-bisquing.
Okay, so only to bisque.
Yeah, all those layers. I just need to like set it where it's at.
And then what's your final temperature?
A hot 6.
And that's when it's getting that real deep, rich color. Because it's funny, the way you touch clay has the remnants of the soft clay. Like the pots still have softness, but then because of the way they're surfaced, they also feel stone-like. Like that they've been like tumbled into that shape, or maybe they've come up out of a river or something. Like they have that type of rounded softness.
And did you ever watch the show The Chef's Table on Netflix?
I haven't, but I'm familiar with it.
It's a documentary about chefs and like their approach and philosophy to cooking and food. The very first episode is this Italian dude, Massimo Bottura, who he's in Italy. He's got like a couple Michelin stars, but whatever town he's in, forget what it is. It's like the Mecca of Parmesan. This dude is so psyched about Parmesan. I've watched that episode so many times. Like literally, if I'm feeling low, I'll just put on Massimo Bottura just to hear him be like, the Parmesan, he's so excited about it. But he has this dish that's like ode to Parmesan. And I'm listening to this. I was like, this is exactly what I feel about clay, right? He's like, okay, we're going to take a raw wedge of Parmesan, stand it up on the plate. Now we're going to whip this thing into like a creamy sauce, right? And we're going to drizzle that over the raw wedge. Now we're going to whip up this crazy like foam thing out of Parmesan, and it like sits on top like a cloud. And then we're going to fry up some little things like the edge of the lasagna, like that little crusty edge bite. Right? It's so good. And he knows this. He's like that moment of that crusty edge. And so he fries up this little shape of like crispy Parmesan, and he'll set that thing up on there like a wing coming out of it. And every possible thing that you could do with Parmesan is presented all in one. I'm like, I feel that with like, there's some things you can only do with slip. Some things you can only do when something is freshly thrown. But it's like, like every 10 minutes, there's another possibility that you couldn't have done this 10 minutes ago. And 10 minutes from now, it's too late. But like now is the stage for and just being able to like exaggerate each and every one of those. I'm just into it, man. There's like these different possibilities arise as the day goes on.
Well, it makes sense because you're often also catching a pot in a state where it's pushing out as much as it can without falling over. And then I'm assuming that you let it dry and then you're doing something else on top of it. But that takes a lot of patience and a lot of trust in the process, because when I'm working with students and I'm trying to explain altering, I'm often saying only touch it enough that it moves the minimum amount you want it to without collapsing the pot. Because usually they get in there and the pot's too wet and they're monkeying around with it and then the pot falls over. So do you have to like tell yourself like, don't touch it, just let it be there, don't touch it?
Yes, I've got a hair dryer and a torch and a bunch of like melted bats too. Just, because sometimes that's what it needs. It's like, I need all of this to still be workable. But after this move, like I just took the legs out from under it, but I have to do this stage first. But now I need to like strengthen this to be able to work above it. Have you ever had Krista Assad on the show?
I have not, no.
She was another workshop that I got to go to that she was just awesome. And she said, she was kind of just, I don't even know if she was talking to us. She was just kind of thinking out loud, but she was like, she said, I left my hotel room today and like I was walking down the hall to the elevator and I was noticing that all the room numbers had Braille next to them. And then you get on the elevator and all the numbers also have Braille. She said, I was just thinking like, this is like this superpower that there are some folks who can navigate the world just as well as we do, just by reading these tiny, tiny raised bumps on the surface of the. And she said, and then I thought, potters kind of have this like superpower too, where, the thing that like you've made a bunch of pots, they're sitting on the table. And you just kind of take your finger and you go you're like, but, you're just like touching rims. And it just looks like, right? But what we're all gaining from that touch is like, this one needs about 10 more minutes. I'm going to handle this one next. That one needs a little spritz and to go back under plastic. Like just with like a touch, all you did was touch it. I was like, damn, Chrissy, you're right. Like we don't think about it, but it is this like knowing exactly what it can do and what it's not quite ready for at any given point.
So when it comes to your like daily life, what's the balance of you working on your own work and then you working on gallery stuff?
If I am like off center and out of balance, I'm doing both at the same time. And there are some days, man, where I just have to do both. But I am much better at like, okay, today is gallery day. I'm going to photograph work. I'm going to, send out emails or invitations or respond to whatever it is. But I kind of can't like confuse the two. And those spaces are only like 15 feet apart. I'm either going to come home where like my jeans are still like I can wear my jeans tomorrow or like, yeah, these are heading straight for the washing machine. I just do better that way of like one or the other. And I've certainly had seasons of where I'm away from the studio too long and I start to get cranky and resent everything,
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And it's like, no, like I want to do this. I love this. It's just gotten out of balance. And we have a residency program here as well. They are so helpful. Like when we have new work come in, they'll unbox the new work, take all the bubble wrap or foam, roll it up, so we can use that again, recycle the peanuts, collapse boxes, put them out for recycling, line that up. And we pay them to do inventory, where they'll kind of line it up, sticker everything, do the measurements and descriptions, enter that into the computer. Photography is something that I'm not ready to relinquish that. I don't know if I ever will be. I also feel like I don't really see the pots until I photograph them. Because you're like, whatever this profile is, someone spent a long time working on that exact profile. And if I've got it turned 20 degrees the wrong way, yeah, it's like, what is like the magic shot? How high should the camera be? Where, like, how should that pot be turned? And if I'm going to tell the story of this pot in 3 or 4 images, like they better be good. But I find myself so many times after I photograph work, I'll reach out to somebody and be like, damn, this is a good show. Where, like, I knew I liked it, but there's something about looking at every piece that closely and just appreciating every detail, every silhouette, the texture of things.
There's something about looking through the viewfinder. It is a focusing agent for me. Like, I feel the same way when I'm photographing my own work. I'm often learning a lot as I'm doing that. But you brought up something that I wanted to talk more about, which is the residency. And this, we can actually wrap up on this topic. The residency, it brings energy to you, which I think is really nice. Because I know you're not in a big urban area where there's a lot of people just like naturally coming there. So how did the formation of the residency, like, what is it that you get out of that, and what is it you give them?
Like, when I started, there were no potters in town. I graduated, I set up my studio. There was no one around to ask anything. And I remember the first time somebody told me about, like, something about a business license. I was like, what? Shit, we're supposed to have a I was like, uh-oh. Just a million things that, like, and so many of those things almost sunk me. Like, I almost never started for so many reasons. And I thought back then, like, if I'm ever in a position to be able to, like, help somebody through this stage, man, I want to do it, And I wasn't always ready. I worked by myself for a long time. But yeah, Kelsey was our first, like, long term. And then Andrew Clark joined us after Kelsey. Megan Winters joined us. Lakin Bowman came from Illinois. Juan Barroso came from Texas. Ashley Akerson, she's living in Jackson, Tennessee, and so she's been with us this past year. And we just welcomed Horacio Casillas. He arrived about 2 weeks ago when Ashley left. So yes, like, I'm 45 now, and something about having, late 20s or 30-year-olds in the building, there's an energy to that for sure. There's a lot of different aesthetics, a lot of energy, a lot of different ideas. So with the stage that they're at, it was like what I need is, there's so much going on around here. I physically cannot do it anymore, but it's all clay related. It's all a learning opportunity. And what I do have at this point in my life is a studio to share. I tell them they can use as much clay as they want. They can fire for free. They want to mix up glazes. Like, the only thing they need to buy is if they're using underglazes or mason stains. Besides that, like, use whatever and how much of whatever you want. And then they give us 10 hours a week of studio work. And then above and beyond that, we have, like, we pay them to do inventory. We pay to teach. We pay them to pack boxes too. So they are some expert pack and shippers around here for sure. And then my youngest daughters, Mary and Evelyn, they have both fallen in love with clay. So I share a studio with my youngest daughter, Mary, and she does sculpture. She does these little characters she calls boys, Boii. And they're just fun, man. She hand builds them, and they're just like full of life and color, and they're great. And then my daughter Evelyn, who'll be 18 next month, she throws, and her work is, she has a love for the ocean and for sea life. And somewhere, man, she started seeing images of like plastic in the ocean and just the state of our world. And she has really taken that on as like a subject matter in her work. So on the surface, they look very cutesy. But when you look close at those pots, it's like a lot of sea life in peril, stuff like that. And so, Evelyn's learning the ropes over here. She's running the pug mill and mixing clay, and it's great. Just while I'm talking about them, my oldest daughter, it's actually her birthday tomorrow. She'll be 20 tomorrow. My oldest daughter, Eden. So we've got a good day planned tomorrow. We're going to go see, what is it? Thor, the new Thor movie.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
To wrap up, can you leave the website for the gallery and also for you, or Instagram, however you want people to find you?
Yeah, the gallery's companiongallery.com. And same thing with Instagram. We have a Facebook page, but man, I can't really fool with Facebook anymore. That thing has sat dormant. Don't look there. That's some like 10-year ago stuff. And then my own, I've got a page on the website, and then my Instagram, just my name, Eric Botbyl.
Well, thanks for taking the time, man. It was a pleasure to connect.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Ben.
I'd like to thank Eric for coming on the show. I appreciate the work that he's doing with Companion Gallery, as well as his pots, which I'm a big fan of. I did want to thank today's sponsors, that is the Rosenfeld Collection of Functional Ceramic Art and Amico Brent. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch through the Brickyard Network website, which is brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities whose lands we reside on in the United States, and recognize that we are uninvited guests on the occupied, unceded, and ancestral lands of over 500 nations indigenous to North America. By acknowledging and reflecting upon the contemporary lived experiences and histories of the Indigenous peoples here and globally, we may begin to take essential steps towards creating a more equitable world. Learn more through the #HonorNativeLand initiative of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture and consider contributing to Indigenous-led organizations doing important work to further health and wellness, sovereignty, and self-determination of the First People of the lands you reside. This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.